G'day, everyone. Welcome to Get Lost with a Travel Guide, episode number 22. And we are going to be talking about Syria. Place I've never been, place you most likely have never been. But we've got joining with us Carly. Now, Carly, this is our second podcast with each other. We did a previous one together about Iraq. And during that podcast, you dropped a big bombshell a few minutes in there saying, oh, by the way, I've lived in Iraq for a few years. So let me just sort of summarize. But not Iraq. You lived in Syria for a few years. I'll get them confused. But you lived in there. You lived in Syria for a couple of years from 2009, 2011. Now, just before this podcast, it sort of blew me away because I've been doing some research. And since 2011, so you were there around this period, there has been multi-sided civil war. Syria was ranked last on the Global Peace Index from 2016 to 2018, making it the most violent country in the world. The conflict has killed more than 570,000 people, resulting in 7.6 million refugees being displaced. The organization called the Human Rights Watch determined that the country is the worst in the world in 2010. Now, apparently you were living there at this period, labeled by citizens as the least free in the world. Is that correct?
That's what the statistics are saying.
That's the stats. That's all pulled off the most reliable website, Wikipedia.
There's a lot to unpick there, definitely.
So can you like, honestly, that first podcast blew me away. It's my favorite podcast that I've done to date because of the information you're able to provide. Because many other countries, you can Google it and there's an abundance of tour operators or websites, which is pretty reliable. You can't really find a lot of information on Syria. It's very limited, and part of the government has a lot of restrictions on what can be recorded and things like that, from what I can gather. So I'd love to unpack this. So the first thing I'd like to ask you, because when I Googled Syria, first thing that popped up was Wikipedia. And then it was like top questions people ask. Well, this is interesting. So top 4 things that people commonly Google about Syria. Is Syria still at war? What is currently happening in Syria? What is the problem with Syria? Why is Syria at war? Can you sort of summarize that?
Yeah. Okay. So first question, what's happening in Syria now, is it?
Is Syria still at war?
Parts of Syria are still at war. Again, it's quite difficult to get reliable information, both inside and out of Syria, because as you've read, which you're writing readings, that it is hard to get accurate information. People living in Syria themselves find it hard to get accurate information because there's lots of government-funded TV. And yes, areas, especially in the north, the border with Turkey, there are still problems out there. It's between the government and you have lots of different factions fighting for different parts of the land. It's very, very complicated. It gets very confusing when trying to explain it. But yeah, there are still parts that are predominantly unsafe.
That is basically my conclusion. I can try to summarize it because I've just recently done hours of research just prior to this podcast. And there's many sort of conflicts or wars in history. They're probably more easier to understand on the reasons why. This is so complicated for me to try and be able to figure out, but I think it stems back from like post-World War I. And the French occupied it and basically mandated their own sort of power there, which is no different to the French that did that in like Southeast Asia. So I think what happened is after World War II, or during World War II, the Nazis completely took over the French. They lost their power. They lost their ability to be able to maintain their presence, which started the war with Ho Chi Minh, or the Vietnam War, because they were present in Southeast Asia. And I think that was the case in Syria. So what happened, I think, in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, there was a tremendous amount of conflict. And post-World War II, I think the French and the British just put a whole bunch of different types of people in and around the Middle East area, and sort of like Israel, for example. And then, but more in recent times, which is, I think, fueled the conflict, is there's a very, like, I've done my homework.
It sounds like you have.
I literally I knew that Syria wasn't the desirable place to be. I didn't know exactly why or the history that sort of fueled anything. So a guy called Hafiz al-Said was the president from 1971 to 2000 before he passed. And his son took over, which you may have heard about in the news, who's the current president at the moment, a very controversial figure which makes alliances with North Korea and Russia. Bit of a fun fact about this guy, he was a doctor in the Syrian army and spent years in London. Did you know that?
Yeah, his wife's British.
Whoa. So according to this, me from Australia, you were from England. And according to my government on smarttraveller.gov.au says, do not enter. You can't even fly there because of all these conflicts and bad times. But how could the president of Syria, I wonder, embrace the Western world in the UK? That's something very interesting. I don't know. I can't say you know him personally. I'd imagine you don't, but it might be a question you might not be able to answer.
Apparently, he used to before again, so back in 2010, he used to just wander around the markets in Aleppo. He would just casually walk around the markets and just dine in the top restaurants that people had access to. So he wasn't completely closed off. Now, no, I think that's a different story. Now he's not. I don't think now he's allowed to leave anywhere. But
like, is there a lot of, or was a lot of support for him when he was in, like, still in power? Like when you were living there, people like, yeah, he's number one. He's doing the best for our country.
Yeah, he was had a lot of support. I do remember. I mean, it depends who you speak to. I had lots of friends when I lived in Syria. A lot of people would say they loved him out of maybe fear. We don't have free speech as such as we would have in Australia and Britain, of course. So people are always a bit worried about what to say, who's listening. There are lots of secret police, Mahabarat they're called. So you never know who's listening. So a lot of people would, of course, love their government. But then there were people who would speak quite freely. A lot of my student friends, university friends, journalist friends who would not agree with the government, not agree with what they were doing and the certain things they were implementing. As there is in every country, there are always different factions of people wanting to believe certain things. So there was, but now in Syria, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would outwardly come out and say, no, I'm against the government. Those people have left Syria and they will write from outside.
So one of the things I'm interested to know, the conflict that's now started in 2011. Now, you lived there for a couple of years from 2009?
Yeah, late 2009, yeah, 2010, yeah.
Okay. Why? What motivated you to move to
move
to the least peaceful country on the world?
Well, you see, at that time, it wasn't. Despite even then, I remember reading a book, and it said that in up till 2010 or whenever this guidebook was written, 2009, 2010, it said there'd never been an attack on any Westerner ever in Syria. And I remember I just wanted to pass through Syria to visit Jordan. It was just an access to get through to a place. And then I got offered a job to guide in the Middle East, and I was like, well, I get to go to Jordan. So on my first tour, I went through Syria and I was blown away by a tree that I'd never really heard of, never read about. It was just a means to get to Jordan. And the hospitality, the kindness, it was something I'd never experienced. I mean, don't get me wrong, they have no idea how to deal with rubbish. It looks a mess, the country, it always did. You enter and there's rubbish everywhere. There's
people just throw their garbage on the street.
Yeah, it's
wow.
There's no, yeah, but then aside from that, so the aesthetic look, the soul of the place was something that I had never experienced in there and Iran. Probably I've never experienced it. And it was something that people would always say, oh, wait till you experience the kindness of the people. And I mean, you've traveled a lot, Ben, as well. And you sort of think, yeah, whatever, what really, I could never really understand that so much until I got to that country. And it really took a different meaning for me. And so many people on our tour would turn around and go back to Syria because a lot of people lived in Damascus.
Wow.
I lived in Aleppo in the north, and it was just real community based. People really looked after each other. It was a lot of pride, a lot of humbleness, kindness, despite lots of things they've been through. So it was fascinating to experience that. So I
Yeah.
stayed.
So the reason why you stayed is for the culture or for your day-to-day Syrians who live in their day-to-day life. Like you
Well,
found like a connection.
yeah, pretty much. I mean, I was leading tours in the Middle East. So my tours were operating from Istanbul, across Turkey, through Syria, Jordan, through to Cairo in Egypt, and then back. So I was looping on a tour. And then when my time off, I would live with my friends in Syria. My friends were Syrian. One of them was Australian who'd met a Syrian. Um, I had a few Palestinian friends, a few Iraqi friends. Syria welcomed lots of people from Iraq, from the war in Iraq. So they welcomed, just despite what happened with Syria now, and not a lot of people would welcome the Syrian refugees. Syrian would open their arms to Palestinians, to Iraqi refugees, Sudanese refugees. So there is a whole network of people, and I became good friends with them. And I really enjoyed living in a country where I could try to learn the language, where I could experience, like you say, a different culture, but with such a nice, connection to the people.
How do you get around? I mean, you speak English. Did you learn any? I think it's Arabic.
Yeah, I learned Arabic there. Yeah, I really enjoyed it each day, and I'd have a little. I'd had a friend. She was Syrian. She lived there. Her family. They would. Yeah, she would teach me Arabic. I'd practice with my friends. Swear words, of course, right?
Can you still speak it?
Yeah, I can still. I mean, I get
Wow.
I have to. It takes a while to remember it, but yeah, I can still speak it. Yeah, enough to get by. I mean, I can by no means have a political conversation about things, and I probably wouldn't want to.
Like,
but
can you like how fluent on a scale of 1 to 10? Like 10, you can write poetry in Arabic and speak it, and level 1, you know a couple of words.
Oh, I don't know. When I left, I don't know, probably 4, level 4, I think. I can read and write the script as well. I mean, like a 5-year-old probably, but
still pretty good. I can't.
And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the immersion. I enjoyed being probably a Western woman in a country whose rules and the way of the fabric of life was so different. And I think us travelers seek that, don't we? I was no longer a tourist in that country. I was part of living in that country, and it was
Can I ask, why did you leave?
Because it got too dangerous. And my mum, I think, called the embassy probably and told them to kick me out.
Would you live there now? Because I think now things have started to open up a little bit more with COVID, and tours are just starting to get a bit of momentum. I think you took a tour there a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
How was that experience? What had changed?
Oh, I mean, a lot had changed. I mean, I had gone back previous to that 2 years before that, and that was quite shocking for me because of how much destruction had occurred in the country. So when I went back in March a few months ago, I could see how they had started to rebuild, but mainly they're rebuilding the mosques, they're rebuilding the souks of the markets, they're rebuilding them. And you can see now that people, especially in Aleppo, this is where I used to live in Aleppo, that was destroyed. Half the east side of Aleppo was destroyed. So a lot of people are coming back now, and it was really nice to see little shops had started to open. You know, one guy would sort out our tickets for the bus, and it was nice to see his shop open. Or there's a little falafel store down the road, and that had started to open. So it seemed like people are just, I mean, it's hard. I mean, the amount of money, the inflation, the cost of things for locals living there is crazy now. Everything's 5 times what it used to be.
Yeah, I've heard that things, research come about an hour or two ago, that people, as like a means of making revenue and business, is smuggling over petrol from Lebanon.
Yeah.
Is that how? So if you're driving around, like, you can't go to a petrol bowser and pay, like, how do you fuel up your car? Is that
we traveled through Syria with our collars like this, because in the back there's 2 big jerry cans full of petrol that they have to go and find off the black market. So yeah, all of the petrol stations are pretty much empty.
And the driver's got a cigarette out the mouth as well at the same time.
Yeah, of course. He's like,
yeah. What can go wrong?
Back down the road somewhere.
Oh man, like God, it's really hard to. I mean, I'm so inspired to go and visit. Like, like I look at in modern history, and I think two good examples is maybe Germany and Vietnam. Like to visit Germany just at the end of World War II, 1945, don't do it. But there was a point in history where things got back on its feet and things started to change and things started to, and Vietnam's the same. Like millions of visitors go to Germany and Vietnam now. But when would Syria, do you think, get to that point where, okay, it's a bit stable? I mean, it's hard to say. You don't have a crystal ball. I mean, there's still tremendous amounts of conflict there at the moment. But you went there as a tour guide recently.
I
So I'm a
mean,
bit confused on the information. I'm like, well, one side's telling me don't go and you just went. But mind you, you have to accept the fact that, you know, you need to ride along with petrol in the back of the car and
yeah, this is
accidentally get
it.
blown up by a cigarette or
I
or
know.
or what or you know or be kidnapped. What? How's the crime? Like, do you feel safe in the streets?
Yeah, and I always did. I mean, I would always say, I mean, sorry, this is going back to a previous question where, you know, even before, when Syria was as peaceful as anything, there's no petty crime. People, if anything, there's so many stories in Syria of people. I mean, we worked in Europe, didn't we? I would hold my bag to my chest.
Mm,
That wallet was never out. You know, so paranoid for everything. In Syria, people would leave. People would have wadges of money. It's bit different now, but people would have big wadges of money. I could have my bag open. People would run after you if you dropped anything in the street. It was such a safe country. Petty crime, maybe because, you know, you live in fear of your government slightly of anything, you know, to go wrong, but also because of the, you know, the Islamic code which they live by. So there was never that in Syria. Now it's probably because of the situation and people are living hand to mouth and people are just trying to survive. I'd say that, you know, there's a lot more poverty around.
mm.
um you know, Syria never had a problem with homelessness because they look after their people, they look after their elderly, but now you see a lot of people begging. So I think now it is more of a problem, which is unfortunate, and that is the fallout of war. You know,
Yeah.
this is what happened. But it is, in terms of traveling around Syria, before the war, I never ever felt unsafe in any Middle Eastern country. There might have been like a dodgy, you know, an incident with a man trying to, um, you know, grab my arm or something, but that was probably once in the whole
Grab
10
your
years I've been
arm.
up. Yeah, but just as like not even in a sort of aggressive way, but just, you know, just to be close to a female. You know?
Right. So
That's
a creeper.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
I have more fear on the London Underground than I have ever. Even to this day, I
Mm.
don't feel like that. In Syria, even when I went back, um, I mean, the companies that I work with out there, they know the country too. They know where they can and can't go. They have friends everywhere, knowing what the roads are like. There's so much security presence from the government, police
Mm.
check. It would be really hard for that to be a problem. And, you know, Daesh, as they call it, or ISIS, who are off sort of in the borders between Syria and Iraq. I mean, you know, if we were to head out that way on our own, then yeah, we'd probably meet a few problems. But there's no way that we are even,
So you
as
don't go to
visitors,
those
allowed
type
to.
of places. You go to more safer pockets or provinces, regions.
Yeah, yeah, like, you know, we wander around the old city of Damascus. There's never been a problem in that part of Damascus. And then in
Actually, fun
places
fact:
along
that's
the,
the oldest continuous city in the world.
yeah, between that or Aleppo, they
Mm.
argue about which one is the most.
Well,
Yeah.
thinking of like, I think we could just rattle on for hours of all the reasons why you shouldn't go there, and people will mostly act cautiously on fear when making a decision. So I don't think I can really convince 90% of people who'll be listening to this about, oh, I'm not going to go to Syria. I'm sure you can make it amazing, but maybe one day in the future it will be safe to go. I will go because I'll book one of your tours. I don't think I'd be able to have confidence to go independently, and I don't speak the local language, so I'll get stuck, I think, very fast.
The
Prior
one
to this
problem,
podcast, I did a bit of homework trying to find accommodation on Airbnb and Booking.com. Nothing come up, absolute donut, and I couldn't find flights there. So if I called up a few friends, I'm like, hey guys, let's have a bit of a holiday. We're going to go to Syria. Like after they stop looking at me like, okay, yeah, nice joke. I'm actually quite serious. I don't think I have the ability or know-how or knowledge or expertise to be able to put it together from a group of friends to go. But can people do that? Like, can someone from
Not,
Australia just turn up and hire a car and drive in?
not
Or do you have to
anymore.
do like a more of a structured guided tour?
Yeah, this is what's now happened in the country, which I found very frustrating at first, because Syria used to be so free. You could travel, you could just hop across on a little shared bus across the border, sleep on roofs, hike out into the desert. You could, and people would. But now, because of the problems now, everybody has to have either it's a guide, or it's sort of like a someone, yeah, who's looking after you, like a driver or a guide that's been registered by the government to pick you up. Usually they pick you up in Beirut, you have a driver across the border, or they meet you at the border, the border to Lebanon. And then this guide is sort of responsible for you on your trip to Syria. So you can now only stay for the visa's a maximum of 14 days. So whichever agency you book through, they sort out the visa. It then goes to the government. You then get approval or not. No Americans have had any. I think maybe, actually that's a lie, maybe about 1 or 2% of Americans get approval for their visa. It takes so long, so Americans are still not really able to travel
How do you prepare? Like, so you're about to do a tour, and you just did a recent one a couple of months ago. How many people be in your group?
I only had 4 last time, because a lot of them were Americans and they didn't get their visa in time.
Okay, what are the common questions that you need to, or you get asked, or you really need to prepare people before crossing the border?
People were very surprised when the people on my tour, very surprised at how safe they felt in Syria. I think because of what we know from media, because of how people present it, it's this war zone. And Syria got a bad press even before anything of this happened. It was always part of this axis of evil that never was so. And
I think,
it is my word. It is my word against
yeah,
all.
I think there's a bit of propaganda there, because
Yeah.
of what I've recently learned is the political ties between Syria and Russia.
Yeah, and Iran too. All of
Yeah,
that.
so they could produce a golden nugget for the world. Find a cure for cancer, and I can understand why you'd always get bad press. Why would you promote something good if you don't have good political ties? That makes sense.
That's it.
Sorry
Yeah,
for cutting off, but yeah, sorry. Could you sort of elaborate? Like, so you basically, like, people were very fearful, and you're like, no, don't be scared. That's a hard pill to be able to swallow, despite being
yeah. I guess those who are really
negativity from the
fearful
media.
just don't come.
Mm.
But even, the people I speak to, my friends I speak to, over the years, they've got now to understand, when I'd be raging at the TV or raging at whatever's coming out about Syria, that there is another side to Syria, which is one that I'd become a bit of an ambassador for the kindness of the people. And a lot of people, there's a lot of controversy now still about should people go back to Syria. And it's the same as we hear in other countries, isn't it? About should you visit a place that's basically, they keep saying do not go, whereas I'm saying it's safe to go. But it's not like, if people are going there for the dark tourism. I think we mentioned this about Iraq. I don't agree with that. I don't agree to go to a place to tick off a box to say, voyeurism,
To photograph like a worn-torn building or something.
yeah. Whereas, because I lived in Syria before, and what I loved about the country is what I want to show people. So if people are fearful, this is what I reiterate. I say, look, I lived in this country before. I know the reason why I lived in Syria, and lived in, it's a developing country still. It wasn't as easy as living in the, internet would never work, things like that. So I just explain to people, if anything, that within a day, people know. I introduce them to certain foods, to certain people, if I can. Quite
Well,
hard to know.
can we find out? Because I've been looking at places that I think, for me personally, was interesting. What do you go experience and explore from a positive cultural perspective, or what's the good stuff to see in Syria?
It's the good stuff to see. The old city of Damascus. It feels like you are in the oldest city in the world. It's amazing. It's like a labyrinth. And the smells of the markets, the souks. It's how I think it's how we would have been living 50, 60 years ago, where families still come together. People do their shopping in the market. You have one street with all the meat, one street with all the spices. Everything's got tiny little lights. You have the mosque with the playing the call to prayer, and it takes you back to time. It takes you back to, there's still horses and traps pulling things around. The desert, Palmyra as well. I'm sure you've read about Palmyra, the ancient site out in the desert. That's beautiful. That's unfortunately been destroyed quite a bit. What else?
What else? I can tell you something that's what else.
Yeah,
I think it's in Damascus. There's the Damascus Opera House. Go on to Google image, folks, and type this in: Damascus Opera House. The architect is built in 2004, but they have this ancient sort of look about it. Like if you see all those like temples or mosques that, you know, hundreds or centuries years ago, it looks like they built it in the side of a mountain, and it's all very sandy, it's very dry, but that's how it looks. And in the inside, it looks like a state of the art opera house, like the Sydney Opera House would. And
you
I was
know
like,
what? I haven't even seen the Opera House.
Well, you got to go check it out now. It looks like this giant cube of like modern architecture mishmashed with ancient architecture. Anyway, it looked like, I'm not an opera fan, but the building itself was like, man, this is wouldn't have expected that. I think soccer is a real popular activity. Like there's an international stadium there, or in the city that you lived. It was like 50 odd thousand seats.
Wow.
Didn't even know. Yeah, that's all on Wikipedia. Well, tell me more about the food. Everyone loves their food. It's always going to be a highlight of any type of trip and the uniqueness of it. The freshness of the food, I would imagine, is quite good because, correct me if I'm wrong, your mass supermarkets, I don't think would be in place with, mass produced pharmaceutical grade, bloody herbicides, pesticides just pumping out, making grow for mass production. I wouldn't imagine that they have that. It probably is, I'm guessing, very fresh food.
Yes, sort of. Aleppo itself is, well, most of Syria is basically is what's called the Fertile Crescent. So they've had so many sanctions for so many years. They became self-sufficient. So all the food is essentially what we want is organic. That's what they have anyway. So yeah, it's Mediterranean based, lots of sort of meze dishes. Home cooked food's the best. If you can get a home cooked meal from a local family, like my friends.
How do you put
so much food?
How do you do that? How do you set that up? For me, walking down the street, I don't speak Arabic. They probably don't speak English, or do they speak English? Is there enough of a?
Yeah, they do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So
very well educated.
How do you think? I mean, if I was walking down the street wearing this hoodie, although it's probably going to be too hot, but I stand out. They go, that guy is not from Syria. He looks like he's from maybe the United States or something. Would the locals be very interested to get to know me? Would I be like that bit of a mini celebrity by accident?
No, not so much in Syria, especially not in Damascus. People, maybe a bit more now in the north, because people are excited to see foreigners coming back because they believe that's going to hopefully fund their businesses, because that's what they relied on a lot. So it's a bit of a positive for them now. But in Damascus, they're a bit nonchalant about it. We don't get that celebrity-esque status anymore. But yeah, in the north, certainly, and at service stations, people are fascinated. But what's happened now, there are a lot more, Syrians would be very, very open and welcome. They're a lot more closed off now. They're a bit fearful of welcoming people in. So it would be the friends that I know from there. But even then, that's hard for me to do because I have to have government permission now to see friends.
Really?
It's really difficult. Yeah.
Why? What is that? This lack of freedom I've been Googling?
Yeah, and people are a bit worried about getting told off essentially by the government for maybe mixing the list. I could be trying to find out information on Syria. So yeah, it's all a bit
very suspicious of people turning up, trying to uncover what's happening at the country.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's it. Yeah. So that's why, and unfortunately then people obviously, as you can imagine, will just keep themselves a bit, cards close to their chest. So
what would they be afraid of? What could be I wonder what the punishment could be. Like if someone really was disliking the government and the oppression or they experience, they meet me, hey, g'day, mate, I'm from Australia. Oh, you have a different mindset. You got a different cultural perspective typically. Let me just unload my thoughts of what is that would be fearful of, I wonder? I couldn't.
Yeah, they're fearful. They have so many minders, the Mahabharat, which are the secret police. And even before, when I lived there, people would be. I remember bringing this book about the Assad regime, and my friends said, "Get it out the house. I don't want it in the house." They're very paranoid about these, like, secret service essentially. And there's
Mm.
lots of them wearing their leather jackets, wandering around. So everybody does speak a bit hushed, and they keep it down. And they're just worried that these people will just constantly ask questions, and they're fearful. People disappear. People disappeared in Syria.
Well, Carly, we are running out of time, but I also love to finish things on the most positive note. And like I said, it's really easy just to focus on the negatives, and especially with Syria at the moment. But I'm hopeful and confident things will change. But can you suggest if someone has got 1 week to spend, or you said the visa's only 14 days.
Yeah.
How can someone maximize that time in 14 days as a tourist? What would be, okay, because I can't even figure out how you find accommodation there. How do you get around? What do you do? Like, what does your tours involve?
This is what I do. This is why I freelance for the companies based in the UK. I mean, I want to take my own tours out there, but we have an agent in the country, and they book certain hotels. They're encouraged to. They want to use the local homestays as well. So yeah, you can't book.
How do you put that together? How do you find someone on Facebook, or hey, you live in Syria? Got an idea for you. Like, how do you put that together?
There's an agent who I work with, who I've known, and a driver who I've known for years now. So they sort of supply that package.
Gotcha.
To agents in the UK, and that's why it's expensive. It is expensive to go, because you are using a guide, you are using a driver. They're booking everything for you.
How much does a 10-day trip cost, or 14-day trip cost?
It's usually, well, at the moment the trips are 7 days, because there's still access to certain areas that's a bit restricted. So 7 days gives you the highlights, essentially, of Syria.
What are the highlights?
Yeah, Damascus, Aleppo. You head out to Palmyra. You see the little towns of Hama.
So you do sightseeing with locals. Do they have?
You meet locals on the way, yeah. But the driver's Syria, the guide's Syrian, yeah. And then if I can manage to sneak off, if you travel with me, then you get to see the bit of the local side. But
what do you like to do if we sneak off?
Sneak off as much as we can do. Well, in the old town of Damascus, I would take people to a family friend of mine, and you get to have lunch in an old Damascus house. Wow. And you get the best home cooked food, and you get their stories, and you just get to feel the kindness of what Syria is known for.
I do. I've done some home hosted experiences in South America. I didn't speak Spanish. They didn't speak English. But that's something that sort of sticks with me even still today, like how welcoming that experience was. So perhaps that could be the highlight of the trip. You're arguably like worlds apart, so to speak, but culturally so different. The restrictions are very, very tough, but that's an awesome thing. And I love
you'd be surprised with Syria. People are very, especially Damascus, it's quite cosmopolitan. It's quite European feel. A lot of people speak English. A lot of people can speak it better than me.
Well, we're nearly running out of time, but when are you going to go back to Syria?
I'm going back the end of September.
End of September. I'd love to be able to come with you.
See how you go, huh?
Well, Carly, I really appreciate your time on the podcast. There's so much about Syria. Like, we've just scratched the surface on this, with the history, with the food, and how you even get there. I wouldn't be able to do it without you. And if anyone's asking and wants to come to Syria, give me a call. We'll book on one of your trips and we'll have an amazing time.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, Ben. And it'd be good to see you out there too.
For sure.
Really good.
All right. Until next time.
All right, Ben. Take care. Thank you.
You made it to the end of the podcast. All right. You know the drill. Give us a like, subscribe, or leave some juicy comments. And thank you so much for listening to Get Lost with the Travel Guide, where we talk all things travel, tourism, and adventure. See you next time.